Hi everyone, it's Abby with the Bead Place and beadplace.net, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make one of these really fun waterfall wrap bracelets. We're using 4mm fire polish beads, rubber tubing, and a discreet magnetic clasp in the back. So remember, all the materials that we're using can be found at beadplace.net. You can either find them individually or you can find a kit to make it easy, and the links will be in the description below.
The materials we'll be using are 100 4mm fire polish beads. We'll need two 2x2 crimp tubes, 2 little finishing beads, and 1 magnetic clasp. We have a mini bead stopper. You could use a full-size bead stopper if you'd like. I just like the mini ones for lightweight, small projects like this. I also have about 80-ish inches of medium soft flex. You can use fine soft flex if you'd like. It's a little bit easier to push it through, but if you don't mind a little bit of effort putting it through, the medium soft flex is always going to make a more secure bracelet. I have a package of our jewelry tube. This is 2mm rubber tubing and it comes in brown, black, and clear. I have a tape measure. A tape measure is super important for this project. You can't just wing it. We need to measure precisely. We also have a jewelry wire cutter. And then I have 2 sizes of my crimping pliers here. I'm going to be using this purple one that's sized for the medium wire, but definitely use the fine crimper if you are using fine wire. And then the next most important tool is a pair of nice sharp scissors. Let's get started.
All right, so our first step is to take a tape measure and measure your wrist tight. We're not measuring what we think our bracelet size is going to be. We're just going to measure just tight to your wrist. So remember to measure the wrist that you plan on wearing the bracelet on, because in most people, your wrist sizes are slightly different. So on this wrist, I'm about 5 3/4. However, on this wrist, it's a little bit closer to 6. So we're just gonna go with 6 just to make it easier. Since math isn't my strong suit, we'll just go with an even number for this video. So what we're gonna do now with that measurement, 6, I'm going to cut 9 pieces of jewelry tube that are 1 inch shorter than your wrist measurement. So since my wrist measurement was 6, 1 inch shorter than that is 5 inches. I'm going to lay my piece of jewelry tube across the tape measure like this, and I'm going to cut 9 pieces that are 5 inches long. So my favorite way to cut the jewelry tube is using scissors. You can also use just your plain wire cutter if you'd like, but I think it's a bit easier with scissors. So once you've cut that first piece, you can use that piece to measure the other 9 pieces. Be careful, make sure they're all the same length, and make any adjustments that you need to in order to trim any longer ones down so that they are exactly 1 inch shorter than your wrist measurement. If there are any cuts that are longer or shorter, that will make the bracelet kind of not stack up evenly. So we want to make sure that all of those pretty beads stack up on top of one another. And you know, it still looks great if they're a little staggered, but that's not the effect that we're going for this particular project. After you've cut your 9 pieces of tubing 1 inch shorter than your wrist measurement, what we're going to do is cut 1 more piece of tubing that's 2 inches shorter than your wrist measurement. So for me, that's 4 inches. So this piece of tubing is going to be the first and last tubing that we add on. And the reason why it is 2 inches shorter than our regular measurement of tubing is because we're actually going to split it in half and then put our clasp and finishing beads in the middle of it. So the clasp and the finishing beads are going to add that extra inch that we need to make it the right size. So fold it in half and cut it in half. So now I have 2 2-inch pieces of tubing and then 9 5-inch pieces of tubing. So our next step is to prepare our beads. I have a hank of fire polish beads here. These are 4mm fire polish. The majority of fire polish strands that are 4mm anyway come in strands of 50 beads, but you always want to double check to make sure you have the right number of beads. So 2 strands would equal 100 beads. We will need 100 beads because we'll need 10 sections of 10 beads. And so 10 of these beads equals approximately 1.5 inches. That's the magic number that we need in order to add to our length of tubing to get the right fit to go around your wrist and make a comfortable bracelet. So it would be our 5-inch length of tubing plus 1.5 inches of beads gets a 6.5-inch bracelet, which is a good comfortable size for a 6-inch wrist.
So I've cut about 70 inches of soft flex here because that's about what I need in order to make my bracelet. If you're unsure of how to do the math on that, just cut about 80 inches and you'll be able to kind of play it safe with that. But essentially what you're doing is taking your wrist measurement, adding 1/2 inch and multiplying that by 10, and then adding a couple inches just so we have enough room to play with the crimps on the other end. So I've secured a bead stopper to the end of my wire here, and now I'm going to start stringing my beads and tubing on the other end. So the first thing I'm going to do is string one of my shorter kind of half pieces of tubing. So I'm going to string that right on the end of the wire. And now what I'm going to do is string 10 of these beads. So after I've strung my short piece and my 10 beads here, what I'm going to do is take one of my longer pieces of tubing. So this is a 5-inch piece. That would be 1 inch shorter than your wrist measurement. You've got 9 of these. We're going to string that one on. And so a trick that I can share with you if you're having trouble getting through the tubing, lay the tubing flat and take the wire through it while it's straight and flat rather than kind of trying to pick it up and stringing it through while it's curved. And that can make a world of difference. So string it through. Another thing, if you are using a dull cutter, when you cut your jeweler's wire, you might have a little bit of a burr on the very end. If there's a burr, it's not going to go through the tubing very easily, so just trim a new piece on a sharper part of your cutter or go buy a new sharper cutter. So now that we've gotten the longer piece on, we're going to start to string our 10 beads again. So 1, 2, 3.
4, 5, 6, 7, come on, 7, 8, 9, 10.
All right, so now we're going to do another longer piece, and we're just going to work back and forth, 10 beads, 1 longer piece, 10 beads, 1 longer piece, until we run out of beads. And when that has happened, we'll add the shorter piece.
So I'm stringing my last section of beads right now, and after I have strung those, what I'm going to do is take my last piece of tubing. This is one of my shorter pieces, my 2-inch length, and I'm going to string that on the end. Now remember, this 2-inch length is 2 inches shorter than my wrist measurement and then cut in half. So my wrist is 6. We did 2 inches off of that, which is 4, and then cut in half makes a 2-inch length. Now that I have everything strung, I'm going to crimp one side and then we'll check the fit before we crimp the other side.
All right, so the first thing that we're going to do to one end is string on our little finishing bead. Now this is a little tear cast hexagon shaped bead. What I like to use is a bead that has a large enough hole that the wire can fit back to it, and something that's about 3 or 4 millimeters in size so that it tapers down nicely to our next bead, which is a 2 millimeter by 2 millimeter crimp tube. Now this is the tube that will fit the best with the crimp tool that I'm using, so that's why we're using this size. It also is going to work well with our medium and fine soft flex jewelry wire that we're using. Now after I have the finishing bead and the crimp bead strung on, I am going to then string half of my clasp on. Now this is a magnet clasp, so it's going to kind of misbehave, but that's okay. We can just treat it gingerly and hope for the best. So I'm going to bring the wire back through the crimp bead and make sure that the loop size that we make is tight enough that it's not going to be too visible and distracting, but loose enough that the magnet clasp can kind of move freely within it. So a loop about like that looks fine. Now you can change the type of clasp that we're using on this bracelet. We just really like this particular style of clasp because it's discreet, the magnets are strong, and it also makes the exact correct size to fit in that 1 inch missing spot that we need in order to fill in the back of the bracelet. So if you're using a clasp that's bigger, just cut a shorter piece of tubing at the end in order to accommodate for that. If you want these exact pieces that we're using, that way you don't have to do extra math on top of the equation that I'm making you do in the first place. Remember, we have kits available for these exact products, and the information is in the video description below. All right, so I have my medium crimper here. This is the magical crimper. You can find these at beadplace.net. The link will be in the description below. What I'm going to do is take this little crimp tube and put it inside this little scoop that you see missing out of the crimper here. Remember, we're working with a magnet, so it's going to want to kind of stick to the tool. So just kind of do the best that you can to eliminate that. Just make sure that you're completely centered in the little missing ball and then squeeze down. So if I was completely centered, when I open it, this should look like ravioli. So once I open this, you can see that my crimp kind of looks like a puffed pillow with pinched corners. So I'll give you a closer look. So now, once we have ravioli, we're going to squeeze the sides of the ravioli in. So we're going to rotate our crimp so that we're squeezing the flat sides together and squeeze, and it starts to look a little bit more like a ball. And now we're just going to work it around in a circle and squeeze. So squeeze, open a little bit, squeeze, open a little bit, and we're twisting each time we open it. And after we've squeezed from every angle, it should be a perfectly round ball. See how incredible that is? It's a perfectly round ball, and it's very secure. So our next step now is to trim the tail end so that it tucks down into the large hole bead here. You can either tuck it in and then cut it, or you can cut it and then tuck it in. Personally, I prefer cutting and then tucking it in because I'm good at eyeballing exactly how much space I'll need. But if you're not, tuck it in and then cut it flush to the bead. Just make sure you're only cutting the tail end. Now, if you are using fine wire, what you can do then is you can actually tuck your tail end through this finishing bead and all the way down into your tubing. And that's a great way to make sure that no tail ends pop out at all. Now, you're probably asking, why don't I cut it flush to the bead? Well, I mean, you totally could. It just makes it a bit more secure if you leave a little bit of a tail end. So slide your tubing down and then your beads, and we're just going to slide everything down all the way to this end. And so here is where the magic happens for sizing. We need to make sure that this fits us perfectly because it's such a long bracelet and such a wide statement piece. It will be annoying if it doesn't fit right. So if it's too tight, it'll feel cumbersome on your wrist. If it's too loose, well, you know how annoying that is when bracelets fall down on your hands. So I'm going to show you a magic trick that I like to do to make sure that it fits perfectly.
Okay, are you guys ready for my magic trick? I've got this unfinished end here. What I am going to do is string my hex bead on, my crimp bead, and then my clasp. And I'm going to take this tail end and bring it all the way down through the crimp bead and pull all the slack out from the tail end. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out how much I want to compress this tubing. See how stretchy this is? So I can really just pull this down, and you see how these tubes are getting kind of squiggly? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the rest of my bracelet down on the ground, and sometimes I like to stand up for this, but I don't have a cameraman with me today, so I'm not going to stand up. I'm going to keep my camera where it is. So I'm going to run my fingers all the way down this bracelet multiple times. That way I'm sure that there's not any tubing sticking anywhere. You see how the tubing can kind of stick on the wire and it'll leave a blank space of wire like this? we want to make sure that all of that slack is transferred out. So each time you run your fingers down, what we're going to do is we're going to bring the crimp back down and then pull a little bit more slack out. So after you've done that about maybe 1 or 2 times, what we're going to do is we are going to put our bead stopper back on the end of the wire. We haven't crimped yet. We have the crimp on, but we haven't actually crimped it with the tool. So we're just putting that bead stopper back on to make sure that nothing slides back out. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try this bracelet on, even though it's not finished. That way I can see how exactly it's going to fit, since I have everything set up already, just like it would be if I were to finish it off. Now, when we're putting these bracelets on, with any wrap bracelet, really, I see a lot of people start it at the very end and try to wrap it around, but you see how I'm just kind of chasing my own tail doing it that way. So what I recommend with these is start at the second wrap of beads or the third wrap of beads, and that way you've got this kind of heavier tail hanging down, and it'll be a lot easier for you to get it on and off. So what I do to make sure that I have even wraps is I just kind of wrap it around and line my beads up. Don't pull it tight to your wrist when you wrap it around. Just line the beads up and make sure that you're getting a good fit. So wrap it around, line all the beads up, and then what you can do once you've wrapped it all the way around is you can clasp it. So let the magnets kind of join together, get that bead stopper out of the way. And I have a loose but good fit here. Now, this is about perfect for me. It's a little bit on the looser end, so what I'm going to do is show you how to tighten it. All right, so if we need to make it smaller, all we have to do is keep squishing those little rubber tubing noodles down. So you see how they kind of get squiggly? We want them to be extra squiggly. So just keep working on pulling all the length down and transitioning the slack so that it's even. And we can get, you know, almost a whole inch out of the length. Now remember that inch is being evenly distributed within the strand, so don't worry about taking a ton out at first. Just try it and see. Now I'm going to take about a ½ inch out just because it almost fit perfect on me. It was just a little bit small. So I'm just pulling that crimp down to where that slack was and then pulling the tail end out, and that's really all it is. And you just do the opposite of that in order to make it bigger. So I'm going to double check my fit one last time, and then I'll show you how to finish it off. See, it's perfect now. Okay, so now that we've got a perfect fit, all we're going to do is crimp it just like we did before. So just make sure you're leaving a little bit of play between the crimp and the clasp so that it can sit right, and crimp. Turn it so that you're squeezing the sides, and then just rotate and crimp all the way around. And when we're finished, we should have a perfectly round ball. Now, I get a lot of questions either via email or YouTube comment, or a lot of people comment or message our Facebook page over at the Bead Place, and they're wondering why they get what looks like an aluminum foil ball, like a crumpled ball instead of a smooth ball. And that is either because you are using poor quality crimp tubes, ones that are the wrong size, or you're not exactly centered. So if you're getting something that doesn't look like a smooth ball when you're done, that one of those is probably the answer. So now we're just going to trim the tail end and tuck it in. Now you might be thinking, well, why don't we just make it a little bit smaller? Why do we have to squish the tubes? We want a tight fit here because you see how it's still a little bit stretchy. We want it to be tight so that you don't see any wire between the beads. We want to give the illusion that these beads are strung on cord itself. So seeing the wire between kind of breaks that illusion. So now that we have this tail end, we're just going to tuck that into the next bead, our little finishing bead, and we have a finished bracelet. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I just want to say I really appreciate everybody who comments, likes the video, shares it online. We are on Facebook and Instagram as well. We have a brick and mortar store in the St. Louis area, and we host free workshops every last Saturday of the month. So if you are in anywhere near us, we do these projects actually in the store on the last Saturday of every month between noon and 3. And then we always post the how-to video online for those of you who don't live in the area. So we have kits available in our web store. The links are in the description below. And we ship internationally as well. So we have all the tools available online also. So yeah, I just want to say I really, really appreciate everybody who has taken time out of their day to not only watch our videos, but to interact with us as well. And we love seeing finished projects of your completed bracelets, and we really appreciate all the support that you've given us so far. So if you enjoyed watching this video, please give us a thumbs up. It really helps our channel out, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Thanks for watching.